When we talk about digital forensics, we are talking about digital evidence. So the Scientific Working Group for Digital Evidence defines digital evidence as any information of probative value that is stored or transmitted in binary form. This means everything that's in bits and bytes, zeros and ones, from pictures to documents, everything is considered digital evidence. Digital forensics is a much broader category, and we really have to define this in three different areas. One, e-discovery. This is more legal or document discovery. In the older days, when you subpoenaed a company, you would get reams of paper. You get boxes of documents and papers that lawyers would have to search through to try to find the information that they need for the case. Today, those documents don't come in paper form. They come on computers, on disk drives, out of networks. We search through emails. We search through Word documents. So this is what e-discovery is, using computer forensic tools to extract that information. The next level that we're most familiar with is computer network forensics. Data stored on computers, networks, and network security. This is where we are looking for evidence, but basically on mostly Microsoft operating systems, CPUs, networks, and we're trying to extract the same thing. We're trying to look at emails, but we're also looking for video evidence, we're looking for photos, we're looking for the way that the computer is used, and this is probably the most familiar that you would be as a law enforcement person. This would be your cybercrime unit. This would be your child pornography unit. That's what dominates the computer network forensics. But also, something that is growing in popularity is mobile forensics. This is data stored on cellular phones, PDAs, computer devices that are not your traditional laptops and CPUs. And as mobile devices get more prevalent, the more we will see them in crimes and at crime scenes. Today we'll talk a little bit about computer forensics, but our main focus is going to be on the mobile forensics, which is the growing field. When it comes to computers, as I said before, most tools run some form of MS Windows. They're either running the Microsoft operating system up to Windows 7, 8, or they're on a network. 90% of PCs run Microsoft Windows, 30% of networks run some kind of Microsoft Windows tool. A high percentage of these cases deal with child pornography and human trafficking. If not, they probably are in the fraud category. There are some computers that are seized at scenes and then brought back to the lab for other cases, but this is where the high percentage of cases are done. Analysis tools for computers, they extract information from the computer, it does analysis of that information, and then it creates a report. And generally, this is done in a laboratory, not on the scene. So when it comes to at the scene, actual crime scene investigation and computers, what are we going to do? The first thing we should do when we encounter a computer at the scene is we should photograph it. We should take a picture of the screen as it is operating when we find it, and we should take a picture of the peripherals and how they're plugged into the computer. This will allow the examiner later to really understand what the state of the computer was when we collected it. We also need to shut down the computer, and according to the protocols of your precinct or your district, you need to know one of two ways. You need either hard stop or soft stop. Hard stop is physically pulling the plug out of the wall. Now obviously this has some disadvantages. It will be a hard stop on the disk, and there may be some passwords and devices that will re-engage once we plug this back in the lab. Then there's a soft stop. As we know with laptop computers, when you unplug the laptop, that doesn't necessarily mean that it powers down. So a soft stop is the start-stop key method. You know, most Microsoft computers, when you hold the key in, it will go through a shutdown mode and actually shut down. So whichever way your department has taught you or what the protocol is. We also want to label all the cables and all the ports. We want to know what was plugged in where. This will aid in the investigation later because through the logs we will know what was supposed to be plugged in, and trying to figure out what that device is sometimes cumbersome. So if you were to label the cord with, say, an A, and then the port it was plugged in with an A, later on the examiner will know exactly what device you collected and where it was plugged into the computer when it was found. We should collect all accessories. USB devices, thumb drives, CDs, everything that is around the computer, including notepads and paper. People are very easy with their passwords. Sometimes they can be found underneath the keyboard. Sometimes it's a sticky note that's stuck to the monitor. We want to make sure that we collect everything that may be relevant to investigating the computer. And finally, when we want to collect the computer and send it back to the lab or to put it in storage, the best way to do that is to either store it in an ESD bag, electrostatic dissipation bag, to keep any static electricity away from it, or as simple as putting it in a paper bag, like a Kraft brown paper bag. They do not like moisture, and the Kraft paper bag is an excellent way to store electronics. Two other things that we might want to do on the scene: if we cannot capture the computer and take it back to the lab, and we still have to get information on it, if we have the ability to do a disk copy, we can use a unit called a write blocker. This allows us to duplicate the contents of the disk drive without actually interfering with the computer. It doesn't leave any trace of actually being on the computer, and it doesn't change the registry or change any of the data on the computer. It duplicates the disk drive completely. The problem with this on the scene is that it can take time. Obviously, if you are copying over a 500 gigabyte or a terabyte drive, it could take hours to move that data from one disk to another. So generally, most disk copying is done back at the lab where the computer can be taken. Another thing that we need to be cognizant of is RAM capture. It used to be that RAM was a small piece of the memory, 512K, or up to a megabyte, maybe a few megabytes. Now we have computers that are shipping with 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM memory. RAM is erased when a computer is turned off, but a lot of times there's valuable information. So there are tools out there today that we can use for RAM capture that will make a flash copy of the RAM while the computer is still on. It is simple hex to text, so I can read it just like I can read anything from a report. It can have logins, passwords, it can have internet addresses, it could even have the usernames for certain sites on the internet, all stored in RAM. So it may be valuable to have a tool that you can go to the computer, plug it in, capture the RAM, and then go through your normal shutdown procedure and take it back to your digital evidence examiner. On the scene analysis or in the lab analysis, what do those tools do? The first thing and foremost is breaking passwords. Most everybody has some kind of password that they keep you out of the computer. And a lot of times this is done through brute force. Many of the passwords we know, like password 1234, are very common. But even the more complicated passwords have to be broken before we can pull any of the information and data off the computer. Then it analyzes the registries. We can look at timelines. We can look at changes to the computer that the user may have made. We can look at devices that were attached to the computer and how they interacted with the computer. And we can also monitor internet activity based on information inside the computer. Once they analyze this storage, you can identify deleted files, we can identify images, and we can sort all of this so that the examiner can look at this and try to build a case. We can also determine outside interaction. We can look at networks. We can look at how it interacted with the cloud or the internet, and we can see information that may have been posted from social networks that they worked with. So a tremendous amount drawn from the computer, and there are programs that are developed to do this. Some of the better known forensic analysis software that's out there include Guardian, EnCase, which probably dominates the law enforcement realm for evaluation of computers. We also have Access Data, FTK. They also are very popular in a computer forensic tool. Magnet Forensics, who deals mainly with the RAM capture and other flash memory capture. Crew Dataport for copying and copying disks. And then we also have Parabon, who does network and computer analysis. This is certainly not the end-all list, but these are some of the predominant people that are in the industry. Digital at the crime scene. We know that mobile devices are exploding. There were 6 billion cellular subscriptions worldwide at the end of 2012. Of those 6 billion cellular subscriptions, 1.2 mobile broadband, which means that they could access the internet through their computer, or excuse me, through their cell phone. Everyone has a phone, so let's watch a quick video of what our life is like today. So certainly a little bit of overkill, but the Windows Phone and that commercial shows us that cell phones are in every aspect of everything that we do now. So that means that they become part of every aspect of criminal investigation. So let's learn a little bit more about cellular and mobile forensics. Well, the important things to understand about mobile forensics is that it is different than computer forensics. We are not going to be able to use the same Microsoft tools that we analyze a computer with and be able to analyze a mobile device. Two very important differences that we need to understand are the memory and the imaging and how it works. Memory in a computer is static. It only saves when we instruct it to save, unless the program has been set up to do something differently. If you are typing a Word document and for some reason the computer crashes, you have lost the Word document. You only get what you have saved. Save early. With a mobile device, it is constantly saving data. It is bringing in information from the cell phone towers. It's also bringing in information that the user has allowed it to, such as email, text messages. So the mobile device is constantly changing its memory. From an imaging perspective, bitstream is how a computer works. It's almost like writing pen to paper. So it's a continuous stream fed onto a magnetic disk, unless it's running flash drive, which is how mobile devices work. The mobile device uses an active memory where the imaging is assigned and placed immediately. It's almost like a large checkerboard of squares where bits and pieces of information are thrown into different blocks on the grid and then reassembled later based on a master table. So these are very different memories and do not work or are not analyzed the same as a computer. If you went to a crime scene and we find a body laying on the floor, and with that body, that person has a note in their hand. On that note, it says, "This is the last person I talked to. This is where I've been the last 24 hours. Here's a photo of the last person I was talking to. This is the name, my name and address. And in fact, here's a few things that I've been doing." Wouldn't that be helpful in an investigation? How many of you have gone to a crime scene and found a body with that much information in their hand? Well, if you've gone to a crime scene and you found someone with a cell phone, then chances are you may have already had that information available to you. We may know the last person they talked to, conversations they may have had, where they've been in the last 24 hours with all of the social network tracking that's going on now. May have photos, they may have their name and address inside the phone, and any activities that they had participated in. So how do we get that information? So what evidence is on a phone? Obviously, the name of the owner can be on there, the address, what call records, what calls they have made, what they've received, text messages or SMS messages, email, photos, recorded, and possibly with new cell phones and new smartphones, where they've been as far as locations and GPS. So why is it called cellular? Well, the reason we have cellular phones is because we have a cellular network. It's a series of cells. Each cell has 3 towers. Each tower has 3 antennas. And inside the middle of that tower triangle, or 3 towers, we have what's called a MTSO, or mobile telephone switching office. This is where the phone is told which tower to work with. On all of these towers that we see around, there are 2 types of networks that we operate in North America. One, which is run by Verizon, Sprint, US Cellular, and most carriers in North America. Then there is the GSM, which is the global system for mobile, a global standard for mobile, and this is AT&T and T-Mobile only. When it comes to the world, CDMA dominates North America. There are some areas in Asia that use CDMA, but dominates North America. GSM is the world phone. This is where you would find in Europe and most of the world, and of course, like I said, on the 2 carriers here. So what will be important, if we do not have the phone number that is associated with the phone or cannot find that phone number, then we're going to need to provide the subscriber or the mobile provider some information. We want to tell them the carrier and the model. We want to have the mobile identity number, which could come in 2 forms. On CDMA phones, we have the ESN, or electronic serial number, which is on older phones, and we have the MEID, mobile electronic identity, which is on newer phones. On the GSM phones, we have an IMEI, the International Mobile Evidence Electronic ID. And we also have the IMSI, which is on the SIM card inside, which identifies the user to the network. So let's take a look at information on phones.
When it comes to mobile devices, we have several different types of phones on the market. What really determines what's important is which network do they operate on. We have two main networks in the United States. We have CDMA, which is the predominant network, Verizon and several other carriers. Then we have GSM, which is AT&T and T-Mobile. We also have other carriers that piggyback on those networks, which are your prepaid phones, like Boost, TracFone. Let's look at one of the phones and see what we would need to know. One, we know the carrier, Verizon. We know the manufacturer, Samsung. And we can know by Verizon that this is a CDMA phone. And that means that when we remove the battery or any place on the phone, there's no SIM card. A SIM card is the identifier of something that will operate on the GSM network. Of particular note, what we also want to know is we want to know the IMEI number or the MEID number. And these can be found on this name card inside of the phone back. This is a basic CDMA phone. This, again, Samsung, but now this is an AT&T phone. How is this different? This device has a SIM card. You can see where we removed the battery. Okay. This is a SIM card. There's essential data stored, which tells who the user is, and there are some other data that can be extracted. But this is what identifies the user of the phone to the network. Also, inside the battery, we can find the same information, the IMEI number, which is the identifier of this phone on the network, and the SIM card is the identifier of the user on the network. Now that we're in the age of smartphones, the Droid and several others are what they call universal phones. So even though this is a Verizon product, it also carries a SIM card, a Verizon specific SIM card. And that SIM card is stored here. And even though this is a CDMA phone, it has the capability of working on the worldwide GSM network. If you have a smartphone, some of you may not be able to remove the battery to see what the IMEI or MEID numbers are. If so, you may have to do a first search. If you have an Apple phone, you will see that there's a SIM card slot on the side of the phone. The number is etched on the inside of that slot. Sometimes on iPads and other tablet devices, the IMEI is etched on the backside of that unit. And sometimes, if you need to, and you have a battery that cannot be removed, you can actually dial into the pad *#06#, and it will actually display the IMEI on the phone face. So as phones evolve, getting the information will be more tricky than just removing the battery. This is the final phone. As I mentioned, carriers that piggyback on the network. This is an example of a Nokia phone that was made for TracFone. These phones differ from all of the other phones because they do not have data ports. What you see is a headphone port, and you see a power cord port. There is no way to extract data from this phone. Once this phone is made in the factory and sealed, there is no data extraction and there's no data put into this phone. So the only way to attack this phone is to take it apart, and we'll talk about that in more detail.
So that's how we can identify a phone, how we can identify how different carriers operate, and we can give the information to the carrier now as the IMEI or the MEID. So where do we get evidence from? We can get evidence from the carrier itself, from the AT&T and Verizon. We can get it from the phone or device that we're looking at. The SIM card that I showed you in the video, we can extract information from it. Media cards that are put in the phone, or the SD cards that we can get files, videos from. Also a computer and backup files. Most smartphones and a lot of other phones before that actually could be backed up to the computer. So even if we can't get into the phone, sometimes if we have access to the user's computer, we can still extract all of the information from their backup files. And finally, the suspect and witness. It's important that we interview the suspect and possible other witnesses, because if we recover a phone and we don't know who the owner is, they may know who the owner is, and they also have some critical information such as the password or the PIN lock or the pattern lock to open the phone up. They may not be the owner of the phone, but they may have already used the phone before and know this is crucial information for later for our evaluation. When it comes to carrier evidence, this typically requires a warrant. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986 said that your cell phone and the records from your cell phone are your private information, and therefore requires a warrant for us to access it. If you do not have the phone number of the phone or the user, then you will require the MEID or IMEI. This is what identifies the phone to the network. It is unique to each cell phone. You also may want the IMSI, which is on the SIM card. This will identify the actual user to the network. The IMEI tells us that the phone is on the network. The IMSI tells me the user of the phone. We can find out information on the user, their name, possibly their address, their phone number, and their user ID from the carrier. We also can access their password unlock code. This is unique to the carrier and will allow us to bypass passwords on the phone and be able to access the data. This is especially true with phones like Blackberries, which are highly secure, and therefore the PUK may be the only way that we can actually get into the phone. The carrier has call records. Each call has a beginning and ending tower and all the towers that it contacted in between. We can find out the length of the call, the number of the person who initiated the call, and the number for the receiver of the call. We also can find out what kind of service it is. The provider will tell us if it was a phone call or a text message or a data message. So we will know that type of information. The call records are kept, but the content is very limited. Obviously, voice content's not stored, but even text messages are only stored for a very short period of time. T-Mobile stores their text messages for 0 days. That's right. Immediately after they have gone through, they're erased. Other carriers may carry them up to 3 days, up to 7 days at the most. There's no financial incentive for them to save them, and they don't want to use the storage space for storing text messages. So our best chance of getting text messages is actually extract them from the phone itself. But if we want call records, then we would go to the carrier. When we find a cell phone, we go through a certain protocol. First, we want to preserve biological evidence, DNA, fingerprints, anything that we find on the phone. We want to try to maintain power. We want to isolate it from the network. We want to gather any key accessories that come along with the phone. And finally, we do the acquisition of the phone in a lab with forensic tools. Preserve the biological evidence. Before you pick up the phone, first thing and foremost, just like any crime scene, we should be wearing gloves so that we don't disturb any more of the evidence. It is typical to swab for DNA, one swab on the face and one swab on the back. The reason being is that on the front, we typically get a lot of saliva, and so it's a good profile from the user. And on the back, we get a lot of contamination because as people use their phones, put them in their bags, we have a lot of contaminants. So we probably have the best chance on the front for a pure profile. We should do a visual search for fluids, fingerprints, anything else on the sample. And we should place this in an ESD or paper evidence bag for transport back to the lab. We should try to maintain power if possible. Retaining power eliminates a lot of password locks, malware, and other things that may happen to it, but practically this is becoming harder and harder to do. Smartphones don't last very long now, typically 6 to 8 hours before they have to be recharged. And once we isolate this from the network, it's going to boost its antenna and drain the power even faster. So if we can maintain power, we will try, but if we can't, we're just going to bag this and we're going to take this back for analysis. We need to isolate from the network. One way to do this is to actually use an airplane mode, which smartphones do, but if not, we're going to have to use Faraday. Why would we do this? Well, cell phones are always active, as we learned, so they're constantly sending and receiving information. The memory is constantly being written and changed. So we want to keep that phone in its integrity when we find it. The other risk is that there can be a remote wipe or kill. On an iPhone, you can actually lock your phone remotely, and you can also wipe your phone remotely. Android just released an app this year that does the same thing. You can find your phone, and you can wipe it remotely. We want to keep the user from deleting or destroying any information on the phone. So the easiest way to do that is through Faraday technology. So let's watch a quick video on Faraday.
When we're collecting evidence from digital devices, such as a mobile phone, one of the most important things and first things we need to do is to isolate this from the network. We do that through Faraday technology. This is an example of a Faraday bag. There are several made by different manufacturers, but it is made of a fabric that blocks all of the radio frequencies. It's as simple as taking the phone, leaving it on, placing it inside the bag, and then we're going to seal it based on the manufacturer's instructions. And once we've done that, we have now isolated the phone from the network. This will keep the phone from taking in any more data, and it will also keep the user from being able to access this phone. This phone can now be transported back to the lab, and it can also be stored in this device.
So the key is that Faraday will isolate this from the network and keep it from being changed. We want to gather all the cables and accessories. Really important in the old days when there were so many unique cables for all the different types of phones. But we want to gather any power cables, data cables, any media cards that may be around the phone, any extra SIM cards that may be available. And so, like I said, maybe the user's computer because of backup files, if you're able to do that. So why analyze in the lab? Well, tricky. Cell phones are tricky. They're very different than computers. They don't run Windows technology. They run Symbian, which is the old operating system. They run iOS, like the Apple iPhone. They run Android, all of the Droid phones. And then they also have the new Windows mobile operating system, which does not operate like Windows 7 runs on your computer. We also have two different types of acquisition that we want to accomplish. We want to do logical acquisition, which is a software that goes through what the user sees. What does the user actually have access to and what they've saved. Then we can also do physical acquisition, which is memory flash. This is where we're actually extracting directly from the memory chip. And this is where we can even get deleted data, such as deleted text messages, deleted photos, deleted files. We must also document the evaluation and ensure forensic soundness. So we want to hash these files. Hashing is a way of marking the files to say that there's nothing that has changed. So if two different forensic tools were actually able to do the analysis, they should have the same hash. And finally, do it in the lab, because that is where we can control the environment, we can control access to the phones, and obviously we can use the right forensic tools. If we don't have any tools, our first line of analysis of a phone is to take photographs. We can physically go screen by screen, take pictures of the phone book, take pictures of any messages that are stored on the phone. But this is the most painful and probably the least method. We can also do logical analysis, which is using software to access the operating system and what's stored in the phone. And as I mentioned, we can also do physical analysis, which actually does a full memory copy and then captures deleted files. And let's look at a example of extraction.
When it comes to data extraction on a cellular phone or any mobile electronic digital device, we have a data cord that we typically have to use. In the older days, with flip phones and many of the different manufacturers, everyone had a unique cord that would plug into the phone. And that became a real pain because there are thousands and thousands of configurations. Now, with some of the smartphones that most everybody carries, we've come down to one cord, a mini USB, except for our favorite company, Apple, who uses their own iOS cord. When we're using an extraction, we can do this on a tablet or PC. Typically, most of them are Windows-based. Some are flash memory-based that run their own protocol inside the device. But today, we're just showing you the deployable device seizure from Paraben. But there are many other on the market that I will go into more detail. What we're going to do is we're going to find the data port. You can see that there's a data port on the phone, usually on the side or on the bottom. And we can find where the device can be plugged in. Then we're going to plug this in to the PC or tablet. And what this will do is it will identify this as a COM port, and it will treat this like a modem where the phone is talking to the computer. Then we will proceed and follow through the instructions that come with the various software that I'll talk to you more about in a minute.
So now that we have the phone attached to a device, we're going to go through the analysis. What does a mobile software program do? Typically, it identifies the device. So we need to know what the driver is. They're all specific to Samsung, Apple, whoever the maker of the phone is. We also have to pass any locks or protocols. So obviously, the carrier really doesn't want people to extract data from their phone and information to protect the user. So we have to bypass the locks that they may put in, plus what the carrier keeps us from reading the data inside. And then we will extract the data, typically coming out in hex form. And then we will parse the data, so we'll sort it into different file types. So the software can sort it into text messages, call log, phone book, images, video. Typically, these are parsing those based on file types. And then we can also create a case and report, so we can then use that in our own reports, or we can turn this over to legal teams for them to use in their analysis. GSM phones carry SIM cards. Not only can we extract information from the phone, we can also extract information from the SIM card. Data contained on the SIM card include the IMSI, that International Mobile Subscriber ID, which is unique to the user. The SMS messages, so all the text messages are stored here on the GSM phones. The last 10 outgoing calls. I don't know why they don't record the incoming calls, but they will record the last 10 outgoing calls. And then also a simple phone book. Typically the most called numbers from this phone, but there will be a simple phone book stored on this chip. It's also nice to know that you can actually find you can find SIM card editors on the internet, relatively inexpensive, and also some from forensic providers. And we can get all of this information out of the SIM card, so that even if the phone is destroyed and we have no access to the phone, if the SIM card is still intact, we may find some critical information that will help us with our investigation. Obviously, we still want to collect data cards. People move devices, move information. They move files over here, so we have photos, videos, music. We may even have some applications that actually reside on the SD card that will allow us to see how the user was utilizing the phone. These range widely in memory, from as little as 0.5 gigabytes up to 128 gigabytes, and I think at this time we even have ones that are larger than 128 gigabytes. So a tremendous amount of files and data. They're easy to read. Most of these are in formats that can be read on any PC, so they can be invaluable in extracting information. And if anybody's ever done an analysis on Palm, it was very difficult and different than any of the other protocols at the time. Blackberry is still hanging on, and they have now merged with Windows into the Windows phones. Very secure network and a very difficult phone to find information on, but a very secure and good phone. Just will continue to be in the industry. Other devices, TomTom, Garmin, and Magellan used to sell devices and still do sell devices that you can put into your car. A lot of people are using smartphone applications now, but if you were to encounter a TomTom, Garmin, or Magellan, you can actually get the information downloaded off of that through a forensic extraction or just from a computer backup. And generally, you can pull out what's called a GPX file. This GPX file then can be converted to something called a KML format, and that can actually be loaded into Google Earth, and you can actually see the track that someone has taken on one of their trips. So this is some valuable information if you're trying to find out where someone's been. And in fact, some of the backups, some of the TomToms, Garmins, and Magellans actually synced with your phone, and it actually extracted certain information from your phone. So in some cases, on certain models, the GPS would actually pull your phone info, your phone book, some of the numbers that you called, and other information. So doing a forensic analysis of a GPS can yield some interesting things for an investigation. Tablets act more like phones than they do like computers. If we look at the Apple iPad, the Android, and the Windows tablets, they all are running mobile operating systems. The iPad, iOS, Android, obviously, and then Windows with the Windows Mobile. They should be treated like a mobile device. They have flash memory, they run the mobile operating systems, and therefore they should be analyzed with mobile forensic tools, not your traditional Windows tools. Then we have what I call the evil prepaid phone. This phone is a throwaway. It can be purchased at the Walmart, it can be purchased at Kmart, any of the shopping centers. It does not have an ID for the user, and it can be bought with cash. So therefore, for a forensic investigation, it is a very difficult phone to use. It does not have any data port, so there's no access to the memory for a standard extraction with our normal tools. And it, like I said, it does not have a subscriber ID. So even if it does have a SIM card and we can recover it, typically that SIM card is an anonymous prepaid SIM card and doesn't have anything to tie it to the user. The only method to really get information off of one of these phones is to do a chip off or a JTAG. And these are more technically oriented analysis. Chip off is actually desoldering the actual memory chip and reading the hex information off of it and being able to decipher that into certain files. It is accessing the board through its original data port, where the computer or where the phone was actually programmed with its firmware. And this is also a highly technical operation. This can be done by the FBI, Secret Service, and there are certain labs and state labs that do have the capability of doing both chip-off and JTAG analysis.
If you ever wanted to see the inside of a mobile phone and haven't had a chance to break one apart yourself, this is an older model, but this is what the inside of most phones look like. You have a camera, you've got a COM port, you've got a power regulation. But the most important chips on the phone, and ones that we deal with when we're talking about throwaway phones, are the memory chips. Here we have the processing chip and we have a memory chip. When we look at the JTAG process, or if we look at the chip-off process, both of those processes actually access the memory directly at the board, not going through the phone's software at all. We can actually use solder techniques to remove this chip completely and then use a reader to extract data. We can also use the data port to extract through JTAG, and we will talk about both of those methods in a minute.
Okay, so we've already discussed chip-off and JTAG, but you can see that we have to break the phone apart, and then we'd actually have to physically interact with the board, much beyond a lot of the capability of our digital examiners. When it comes to mobile software, there's a tremendous amount out there, but I wanted to point out some of the key ones that you may be interested in. When it comes to flash memory and actually doing a physical analysis, I think everybody is familiar with Cellebrite, or should be. You may not know the name, but you certainly are familiar with the device. If you've ever gone to a mobile carrier and actually had a phone transfer, where you transferred your data from one phone to the other, chances are that you had a little box that you connected your phone to and your new phone to, and that box was made by Cellebrite. This gives them access to the protocol of the mobile phones and pretty much has access to most of the phones released worldwide. So they've used that knowledge to actually create a mobile forensics device called the UFED. So you can find out more information by going to Cellebrite. Microsystemation also has a unit called XRY. Their software and unit does the same thing. They are also flash-based, and they are looking at physical extraction. These are the two best-known companies or methods that I know of to extract deleted data. So Cellebrite and Microsystemation's tools. Parabin has a device seizure. It can be used for logical and some physical extraction. Oxygen makes a very good software package which works well on smartphones. They concentrate solely on iPhone, Androids, and now the new Windows smartphones. Black Bag Forensics concentrates strictly on iPhones. They do all the Apple devices, all iOS, including the iPad and all of the i-type devices. SecureView has a nice suite. They come out of Europe. They have a very good forensic information pool. And then Mobile Edit, which is a little bit less expensive and can do a lot of the old Symbian phones out of Europe, and also can do a lot of newer phones. So this is a sampling of what's out there. There are certainly other providers of software, but these are some of the predominant ones that are used by examiners today. If you'd like more information on a cell phone, even phones that are just being ready to release, I would recommend that you go to a website called phonescoop.com. It will give you details on the cell phone, its make, how it operates, what memory it has, what carrier network it works on. So if you have a phone that you don't know a lot of information on, you can actually go to PhoneScoop and look it up and find a tremendous amount of information out there. If you have an older phone and it's CDMA, like I said, on the Verizon or other CDMA networks, there is a free device out there called BitPIM, and it is also very common amongst practitioners to use this. BitPIM allows you to read CDMA phones, and unfortunately only CDMA phones. It was originally an editor for phone books and adding information to your phone, but it can actually also be used to extract information from the phone and use that for casework. Then there are some resources if you want to read more or learn more. You can always go to the SWGD site, so swgde.org. They're constantly updating with information on both computer forensics and mobile forensics, and this is certainly a site to keep track of if you are in this line of work. Another really good site is the Computer Forensic Cybercrime and Stenography Resources of the Netherlands Forensic Institute. It is an extremely comprehensive site. Includes a huge manual on mobile device capture, even down to such strange things as if the phone was dropped in a barrel of oil. So they do a tremendous amount of research in how things should be handled. And finally, there's the Electronic Crime Scene Investigation, a guide for first responders, second edition. This is put out by the NIJ, and this is extremely dated right now. We're hoping that a new version will be released in 2014, but the last edition of this was actually released in 2008. So from a mobile standpoint, a lot of this information is quite dated. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to hear more about the presentation or anything that I might have stated in the presentation, you're more than welcome to send an email to me at dbennett@sirchie.com. This is also my Skype and my phone number. You can also go to our website at www.sirchie.com and look at some of the technical information, including some of the digital things that we actually offer. I'd like to open it up at this point to discuss anything that you'd like to talk about. And in addition, if you have any suggestions of other topics that would be interesting to you that Sirchie may be able to host or provide, I would encourage you to send that to us in an email or to place that in the chat room at this time. So if there are any questions, time is, you can put those in the chat right now and we'll try to answer those for you. Okay. So I think it was Dan was a user. He asked, was there any methodologies used to defeat the forensic analysis for later those devices? Unfortunately, there is an entire movement out there called anti-forensics. A lot of it was geared towards the computers themselves, a lot of malware to keep people from analyzing and hiding files, being able to hide and mask files. I haven't seen as much of that in the mobile, and especially with the Celebrite and XRY units, which are making physical copies of the memory. Those are really hard to hide from. As far as software, yes, there are a tremendous amount of things people can put on their phones to keep people from accessing the data directly. So it's kind of hit or miss. There are things, but you have to be a pretty savvy phone user for you to be able to put those on. So there was a question about swipe or pattern lock on the phones. Unfortunately, that is a very difficult thing, and I've just been to 2 conferences in the last year where we talked about pattern lock and how difficult that is to get by. We always have, the password unlock code, or we could break into the phone with the carrier. If we don't have that, it's going to be very difficult because there is nothing for us to pick up on. It's not like we can do a pattern lock with a brute force. It's not a typical password. So that's a great question, and I think we'll have to do more research, but I'm going to have to turn that over to some of the examiner experts to see if there's been any breakthrough at all on that particular aspect. And the follow-up question to that was asking about the Apple device, which was released yesterday with the fingerprint lock. Don't know enough about it yet. This was a patented technology that Apple bought into. The information was released on Monday, and so I don't think anybody's even had a chance to really catch on to what that implication is to being able to access it. And also that the fingerprint itself apparently is stored on the phone and is really not even accessible to the carrier, according to Apple. So that's going to be another challenge for forensics. Okay, so a question was asked on solid-state computers, which is a lot of the AirBook and some of the thinner laptops, including all the tablets that are out there. Are deleted files on flash memory actually deleted? And the answer is no. The problem is that they are overwritten faster, but they're not actually deleted. On a hard drive, the drive keeps looking for new space, and it'll move to the next space, and therefore, if you have a lot of disk space, then it doesn't overwrite very often. Unfortunately, on flash drives, it's not that it's deleted, it's that it's overwritten. So if we don't have a large flash drive, and there's information out there that the computer has marked as not valuable anymore, deleted, then the flash drive will overwrite it pretty quickly. So yes and no. The flash drive, the files are not deleted per se, but if we don't get to them in a relatively quick aspect, then they may be overwritten, or at least pieces of that file may be overwritten. NIST, there was a question about the mobile device extraction tools and whether they pass Daubert-Frey, and also whether they are on the NIST tools list. NIST has been conducting a study, has not completed it, and is doing an analysis based on hashing, which is the way of determining if a forensic file has been changed or unchanged. And they're conducting that study right now, and I know that a lot of the tools that I mentioned to you, especially Celebrite, XRY, are both part of that study. I do believe that study should be completed at the end of next year, and once we have that, then you will have NIST-approved tools and methodology. So there's a question, what happens to the phone if it powers down? Will I lose any information? And the answer is no. It's just like if you turn your phone off, or if you remove the battery, the memory, unlike the memory's not RAM memory, it actually does retain itself. So you will not lose the data in it. He also said about extracting text messages. Yes, huh? Yeah, so text messages can be extracted through Cellbrite. The SIM card reader for GSMs, a lot of the SIM cards store the text messages that can be extracted there, and especially deleted text messages, you can only do that through physical extraction. So that has to be done through either the Cellbrite or XRI or one of those similar tools. Okay, so there was a question about storage of electronic devices in a property evidence room. If the analysis has already been completed, or even possibly if it hasn't, the best way to store any of these devices is to remove the battery, because over a long period of time, just like any other battery, we could have corrosion and other issues. So remove the battery, and then storing that phone in an ESD type bag or paper bag to keep moisture from attacking it. And of course, in a controlled environment would be best. So if it's normal office conditions, 70 plus or minus 10 plus normal humidity, I think would be fine. Prepaid phones, really the only two methods that you've got. One is hope that it's got a SIM card, a prepaid SIM card that you could possibly pull out and do the analysis on the SIM card. And then the other one is chip off. And unfortunately, chip off requires you to send that phone off to a lab, usually someone that can take the phone apart, remove the chip, and read it. Okay, so Deborah asked if flash drive or solid state drive computers fall into the anti-forensics because they delete the files permanently. And just as I answered earlier, I think it's the same point. Flash memory is not erased permanently. It actually is overwritten. So it's a matter of timing. Like I said, unlike a hard drive, which usually is very large, you've got gigabytes, terabytes worth of data, so you've got a lot of space to store things. In flash memory, it's just recently that they've started to get bigger at the 120 gigabytes or larger. So in the old days, their best way of utilizing that space was that as soon as you determined that something was deleted, pieces of it were overwritten. So it all depends on speed. It depends on how much you've stored to that drive and how fast it's overwritten. They're not necessarily permanently deleted until they are overwritten. And as long as they're not overwritten, then they're still extractable. And that's where we get our deleted information out of the cell phones. So those of you who would like to revisit this presentation, if you missed something or you want to go back and look at it, we will make this available. Anybody that logged into this webinar will be able to go back and look at it. We did record this session, so it will be available for review. In addition, the chat log will also be available for review. So if there was any questions made in the chat log and any answers that you wanted to go back and look at, you'll be able to do that. So everybody that has access will have access. Good question. So there was a question that said, after the phone has been placed in airplane mode or been placed in a Faraday bag, will the calls that came in after it was placed in there actually be displayed on the phone once it's removed? And the answer is no. That phone will have no record. It won't have a signal that it's received, so it won't know that a phone call came in. Now, what we do want to prevent is, because as soon as you remove it from the bag, if it gets access to the network, it won't remember the calls, but it will start to receive any outlying messages like email and any other type of downloads. So the key is to keep it in that bag until you can isolate it from the network in a Faraday room or some type of analysis area, which would be where your digital examiner probably is. Excellent question. So someone actually asked about getting fingerprints off the phone. What effect does super glue have on the phone? The answer is probably a good idea to do your analysis before you do super glue. It will find all the nooks and crannies inside. I have talked to examiners that have analyzed phones after they've been superglued and have been successful in extracting, but I've also talked to examiners that say that the phone was completely encased in glue and did not work at all after being glued. So for safety's sake, it would be more important to try to preserve the phone by using gloves and other things, and then do the analysis, extract the information off the phone, and then process it for fingerprints using superglue. So someone asked, if an Apple phone is wiped and deleted, is the information still available on a computer? If the person is using iTunes and they are backing it up to their local computer, Even if the phone is wiped, yes, their backup data is available. In fact, there's a tool out there that you can actually get called iBackup. It's a forensic tool that actually specializes in going to the iTunes file on someone's computer and extracting all of the phone information and then parsing it back into its proper files. Now people are downloading their backups to the cloud. So they're doing it through the server at Apple. Now we're back to the Warrant Act, and now you've got to petition Apple to go in and try to get that information. Excellent. There was a suggestion that we should add to the presentation or do a later presentation on what kind of fingerprint analysis could be done to the phone, and then what kind of data could be yielded from that. So we could go through what methods are used on phones. We have actually done a lot of that testing here. So that would be something we could do at a later date. Well, I think we're going to wrap up. We're at about 5 after 2. And like I said, the presentation will be available for everyone who signed into the webinar today. In addition, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and you can Skype me or you can actually call me. Look forward to hearing any information or questions that you may have, and thank you very much for being part of our webinar today.